the future. And in this context, there are a kind of trap. It is just say, wait. But if we wait too long, it will be too late. Because then the situation will amplify and we may call the mammal more or less disabled. Not the insect, but at least for the mammal, it will be a very bad situation. So in front of the situation, we have the deep feeling that we need to build a strong network of international researchers. Even if we can work through internet all over the world, it was very important to have every year a meeting. And a meeting where we have time to do research, to share our research. And it is why we decided to make not 2 days, but 1 week, where we will be able to work together. Of course, we don't want to be trapped in one future. We want to explore the possibility of futures. The first day is the big picture day. The second day is solution at different levels. We will see Peter Bohm, how one of the biggest companies of the world are actually implementing a big tool in their strategy. The third day is perhaps the most important of all the week. And I am very happy because we will be with Erwin and we will go walk along the river or even in the mountains. And we will have time to speak all together and to have insight. Then the first day is the day of synthesis. We will work on the synthesis of the previous day. On the Friday, we will have a conference with local press and television, and it will be a good way to test our ability to deliver a short message for the civil society. And the last day is perhaps the most important day. The Saturday will be the day where we will build the next event.
I think it's very good. No, but let me just get back just one point, then we can talk about things further. A good ground rule in a bifurcation is almost everything is possible except two things. One is the status quo, and the other one is the going back to the past. So of course there are multiple futures are possible, but the multiplicity is in the possibilities, not in the actual futures. And now, I've been editing a journal for 30 years now, more than 30 years, called World Futures. Sure, it's plural. It's not the World Future Studies Federation. We talk about singular. But I say world futures. The world is one. The futures are many. Okay? But it will be one of those will be selected as the future of our world. It may be a small point, but as I said, maybe splitting hairs. But I think it's very important to consider the future is the past. The future is not going to be the same as the past. In fact, the future is not going to be what it used to be. That's a sort of tongue-in-cheek saying. The future is going to be something different, and there are multiple possibilities. And what we do today is going to help select among those possibilities. Okay? And the great task of future thinking is to come up with the kind of models that will ultimately select toward a possible future that can enable 7 billion people or more to survive without killing each other and destroying their environment. That's basically our task. Okay, so just just to start with.
Thank you very much.
This presentation, I hope it won't be too long. I have many slides. I shall try to make it not too long. During the presentation, I shall start by presenting the main challenges we are facing, then the transformations we need to operate if we want to succeed the global transition I was mentioning, and finally, I shall discuss briefly what might be the future outlook. The present challenges. Of course, I won't cover all the challenges, but here are some of the big challenges which we are facing. Demography, extreme poverty in some regions of the world, environment degradation, which is not only local, but which is also global now with the issue of global warming, and the problem of scarcity of resources, which is becoming more and more serious. If we consider the demography, of course, we all know that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there has been a kind of explosion of the demography, and it is quite clear that such a progression cannot continue, because then, at some point, clearly the Earth will become too small for the number of human people on the planet. And therefore, some transition seems absolutely necessary. This transition seems necessary because not only the population is growing, but of course, unfortunately, the standards of life also are progressing. And here you see some of the progressions we should observe. From 1970 to 2030, the world population should be multiplied by a factor of about 2. The energy consumption should be multiplied by a factor of around 3. And the number of cars should be multiplied by a factor of around 8. And it seems clear that such a progression is not sustainable on the long term. It's not sustainable on the long term because the demand is growing, but the resources are limited. Here I have a graph showing prediction by an oil company, Total, about the crude oil production. And we can see that from this graph that they consider very likely that within a few years, by 2020, the oil production should reach a maximum of around 95 million barrels per day, which is a level very close to the level of the present consumption. And if you think about the fact that all the cars, all the planes are moved by fuels which are based on oil, we can see that it could bring very soon very major disturbance in our economic system. But it is not the case only for energy. Essential other goods might be lacking. There may be a growing problem with water. If we consider water, we can observe that the consumption of water is growing steadily, whereas freshwater reserves are declining. It means that quite soon we could be in a situation of peak water also, not only peak oil, but also peak water. And of course, this situation would be very different in different regions of the world, and it could lead to major geopolitical tensions and potential conflicts. We have also some concerns about food supply security, because what happens is that, in fact, arable land surface has not changed since about half a century. And in the future, it is not quite clear what will happen. It might decline due to degradation of land. It might somewhat increase, but then it will lead to reduction of biodiversity. It cannot increase very, very much. At the same time, the productivity, which has been growing very fast during the green agricultural revolutions, seems to be slowing now its progress, especially considering the fact that it relies upon water and energy supplies, which may be lacking in the future. So we have strong concerns. And in front of us, the demand, of course, is growing, especially if we take into account the fact that with the improvement of life standards, the food which people consume contains much more meat, and of course this leads to an increased demand for cereals, and it means that the demand will be more and more difficult to provide because the more important part of the land will be used just for cattle and not only for producing cereals and food for human people. This CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is leaving completely the variation zone in which it was oscillating for thousands of years. And if we do nothing, this CO2 concentration might reach very high levels. Now it rose since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution from 270 ppm to 390 ppm now, and it might reach 750 ppm or even more, which means that if we do nothing, the temperature rise might be very important. It is considered generally that we should not exceed a temperature rise of 2 degrees. And in fact, for getting a temperature rise of 2 degrees, we need to divide the world greenhouse gases emissions. We have to divide them by 2 by 2050. If not, we will get very likely the temperature increase more than 2 degrees, which is considered the maximum for avoiding really catastrophic evolution of the ecosystem on the planet, for avoiding destruction, for instance, of a region like the Amazon region. And this means that, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are now entering in this new period, which we can call the Anthropocene, during which the human activities are really the most important factor for changing the fate of the planet. Changing the climate, but changing also biodiversity, reducing the biodiversity, changing the landscapes. And this is, of course, a major fact which requires action now. Now, all the issues I have mentioned about energy, raw materials, food, water, global warming are linked together. We cannot address one issue separately. We have to consider these issues globally as they are interrelated and linked together. Now, what solutions can we consider? When we consider the solutions which can be brought, it seems to me that there are 2 main approaches. The first approach, which is approach of many alternative organizations, is to promote the degrowth option. Already about 50 years ago, the economist Gerbu Reugen mentioned the fact that all our human activities generate more entropy, more disorder in the world. And for him, the fact that this generation of entropy is irreversible means that the only way to avoid a collapse is to limit the growth and even to choose the degrowth option. Following this analysis, there are different movements which are promoting the degrowth as the main option for solving the problems I mentioned just before, promoting the reduction of the consumption level by frugality, increasing the autonomy and the resilience of human communities, and generally, people who are promoting the degrowth option are proposing to improve the quality of life, to replace the quantity of resources consumed by a better quality. And of course, this is one interesting and important option we have to consider. There is also another basic option which is often preferred by governments and big corporations, which is the technological option. People who consider this option, they are very optimistic about technological progress. They point out the fact that this progress is accelerating. They point out the progress which is made in the area of information science with Moore's law. They take into account the convergence of different technologies, the nanotechnologies, biotechnology, information and cognition technologies. And considering all this progress, they are very optimistic about the outcome. They consider that the progress might accelerate at a rate which we cannot even expect now, and even consider a singularity which might arise in the future, which means a progress extremely rapid. And the same people often also consider that technology will be able to improve even human life with the concept of transhumanism. So I won't discuss all these issues which are of course controversial, but what is interesting is that in fact these two options, they appear absolutely opposite, because on one side there are people who propose a degrowth option, and on the other side there are people who consider that the progress might accelerate at a terrific rate. But in fact, the two concepts are quite different, and people which are considering these two options are not necessarily considering the same variables. In fact, if we consider the consumption of natural resources, it is quite clear that we have to limit, and at some point, to degrow the consumption of natural resources if we want to evolve towards some symbiosis with the environment, which is really a requisite if we want to have a sustainable economic system. So it is absolutely necessary. But this does not exclude a progression of the complexity of our system. The complexity, I shall come back to this right now, but the complexity is measured in information units. It is measured in bits or octets, which means that it is not limited by the consumption of natural resources. Therefore, it can grow very rapidly even if we limit the consumption of natural resources. Which means that if we can decouple these two evolutions, and it is not at all obvious, but if we can decouple these two evolutions, it will be possible to progress towards more intelligence and more complexity of our system while protecting the environment and preserving natural resources. But now, see how to do it. Now, a few words about complexity. The complexity is the information which is needed for creating a system. So the complexity of our economic system is all the information that we will need to create completely this system. The complexity of this system, it increases all the time. In fact, it increases in two ways. It increases by the creation, permanent creation of new objects, of new concepts, which is one way of progression. And it progresses also through the formation of new organizations, new structures, which is a second. So, what are the consequences? We can consider progression of the complexity by, first, the development of knowledge and creation. This is, of course, a cumulative process, which means that normally, if there is no breakdown, the complexity will grow. I won't develop this point, which we will discuss during our debate, and in fact, the fact that we are moving towards a creation society was pointed out already by Michel, for instance, many years ago. But one point which seems to me important is the fact that this evolution towards a creation society means also a possible shift of values, because creation can become then the main motivation. It can replace consumption as a motivation for human people, and I think that this is very important. We can have here a real shift in values. Now, the second way the complexity can increase is by the creation of new connections. I won't develop this. I won't develop this point about the communication society, because this also has been developed and presented earlier. Perhaps I can just point out the fact that here also we have an opportunity for a major shift of values, because this communication at the world scale level, at the planetary level, will help, can help at least, can help to improve the communication and the understanding between all the people at the planetary level. And of course, this is a very important shift. This is the shift Jeremy Rifkin is pointing out when he is speaking about the civilization of empathy. I'm not sure that we will reach rapidly the civilization of empathy. We could discuss that, but at least it is a hope that these new tools can help us to move in the right direction. But I think that the result is not necessarily, the right result is not necessarily achieved. Because I think that without a breakdown, the complexity will rise, but the complexity can increase also by developing ways for exploiting the natural resources in a too extensive way. It can lead to a degradation of the environment, and so it will be positive only if there is a voluntary action for general interest and for protection of the environment. And therefore it means that this increase of complexity has to be combined with an approach preserving natural resources. And it requires also, and this is what I'm going to show now, it requires necessarily also a sustainable supply of energy. Now, if we want to move towards symbiosis with the environment, we need to move towards a behavior for economic system which is close to the behavior of the biosphere. In the biosphere, what happens is that all elements, all components are permanently recycled. They are permanently recycled, And of course, this recycling leads to generation of entropy, but the generation of entropy is compensated by a flux of energy which is brought by the sun, which means that such a system can operate on a very long term on a sustainable basis. But basically, human activities are not organized like that, because they are not organized with a systematic recycling, they are not organized in such a sustainable way, and we need to move towards such a system. This is something which we can realize at a much smaller scale. Here I have a photograph showing an ecosphere. An ecosphere, it is a small system in which a biological system can live permanently in a transparent sphere due to the fact that it receives energy through the sphere, and therefore it can stay in such a way in a sustainable for a very long period of time. The same type of system has been considered at a much larger scale, and in the US there has been the experimentation of Biosphere 2 for trying to create such an autonomous system at a much larger scale, and it was operated, but unfortunately it was not completely conclusive, it did not run long enough, but at least it shows the direction which we have to go if we want to build a really sustainable system. So how can we do it? The first thing we have to do is to develop recycling and integration in all human activities. Generally, any process which is operating in industry or in everyday life works with the transformation of raw materials which are transformed, and then all the waste is released in the environment. And when we release the waste in the environment, of course, it causes pollution. Whereas now, if we recover the waste and recycle the materials, the waste becomes a resource. And it means then that we can go towards a system which would be a system with zero waste and zero resource consumption. Of course, it is a limit. We cannot instantly operate in such a way, but at least it is the direction in which we can go. The other way we can preserve resources is by integration. In the integration process, when we have different activities, all the fluxes, the energy and material fluxes which are exchanged, which are emitted by these different activities, are exchanged between the different units, which means that by integrating these different activities, we can minimize the consumption of energy and natural resources. Well, I have no time to discuss in detail these two options, but I would like just to mention the fact that it is not utopia, it is already a reality. If we consider recycling, I have here just a graph which is based on French statistics about the recycling rate in France of used equipment, and you can see here different types of equipment, and well, you can see that the recycle rate in each case is already quite significant, and in the future there is no major obstacle in increasing this rate of recycling. Of course, we will not reach instantly 100%, but we can reach very high rates of recycling, and in this way we can preserve resources. Integration is also operated. Here I have a diagram which shows which shows what is done at the Kronenborg site in Denmark. In this site, there are different industrial installations, the refinery, power station, there is the municipality of Kronenborg, and all these installations, all these sites, they exchange fluxes of energy and materials, which makes possible to minimize the consumption of energy and resources. Now, we can therefore preserve natural resources in this way by recycling and integration. But we need a sustainable source of energy, because even biosphere operates in a sustainable way, but it operates in a sustainable way because it receives energy through the sun and it can operate photosynthesis. Therefore, in the future, we can approach such a model only if we ensure a sustainable supply of energy. And this is a difficult point. I can be very short now. I'll come back to this issue of energy tomorrow. But in fact, we can see that very rapidly that it will be difficult to meet a growing demand of energy. It means that, therefore, that the first priority, and all people who analyze the energy situation now agree with that, the first issue is to reduce the energy consumption. In fact, sorry, there are two French words here, which were not translated. We need to reduce the energy consumption by moderating the demand, perhaps by more frugality, but we can also reduce energy consumption by organizing new infrastructures, for instance, promoting collective transportation. There are many other examples. We can improve it by, we can reduce it by improving the energy efficiency, and of course we can have all kinds of regulatory possibilities. People will consume less energy if it is expensive. There are taxes, and there are different ways to control this energy consumption. Then we have to ensure the transition towards sustainable energy sources, but this won't be simple. Here, tomorrow perhaps it is a point which we can debate. It is not so simple as sometimes people who are enthusiastic about renewable sources think. It will require much energy, much investment, and it requires also some time. And we also need to foster new ways of life and services to improve autonomy, resilience, and all these changes will lead to different ways to deal with energy.
You have the last word on utilities. What do you mean by
utilities? I mean the fact that energy will not be managed in the same way as it is now. It will be operated in a more decentralized way, and it means that it will be necessary to downscale the organization at a more regional level. It will be necessary to organize the energy distribution in a different way. But perhaps tomorrow I shall come back to these points. Now, we need to organize this energy transition, but as I mentioned from the beginning, we have to think about a more global transition. We need to think about the demographic transition, which is really needed. I think now generally it is considered that the world population growth will slower and will grow more slowly, and that the population might reach a level of around 9 billion people by 2050, and stay at a level not much higher than that. And it seems for me very difficult to fight poverty and consider a very rapid growth of the population. But this is something which we can debate. We need to organize the transition towards a creation and communication society. We need to organize energy transition, and we need to organize transition towards a circular economy. Now, what might happen? Because here I have presented some of the trends which seem necessary to follow. But what will happen really? What will be the future? Because I agree about the fact that we will be one future, but now there are some choices. And in fact here, I think that we have major uncertainties. And these uncertainties are not technical, they are mainly linked to a human factor. They are linked to a human factor, to cultural factors, to geopolitical factors. Considering the human factor, one difficulty is that the complexity of our economic system is growing very rapidly, but the complexity that the human brain can embrace has not changed much since prehistory. This is also a point which may be controversial, but I think that there is a difficulty due to the fact that there may be a growing gap between the complexity of the overall economic system and the complexity that each individual can embrace. And another factor, which is a difficulty, is that cultural factors evolve only very slowly, whereas the technical system changes now very rapidly, within a few years. In fact, we can see that human societies are dominated by cultural factors which go back to thousands of years. And these cultural factors, they evolve only slowly. There are also, and perhaps this is the major point, there are huge uncertainties about geopolitical factors. What will happen? Hopefully, we can organize some kind of world governance for solving the problems which we are facing. And it will be necessary. If we want to overcome a problem like global warming, we need to organize such governance. But we can see that now the different countries are competing and that this is not so easy to organize, and therefore we are not absolutely sure what will happen. We will go really towards world governance, or will we see conflicting nations? These problems are also linked with demography, they are linked with economic instabilities, and we can have some concerns about what might happen if there is a huge economic crisis in some region of the world. Like in the US, for instance, if there is a major crisis, what might happen? Or in China. Well, the future will depend also on the framework in which we live. The population of the world will live mainly in cities for 80% in the future. And what will these cities become? Will these cities become intelligent and ecological, creative, connected and helpful, or are we going to observe the development of some of these miserable and violent cities which exist in many developing countries, and will we be able to overcome this difficulty of these slum cities? All this means that we have to consider choices which will determine the future. And here these choices, I'm presenting them according to two factors. First factor is accelerating or slowing the growth of complexity. And here we have the choices. We have the choice of promoting creation or consumption, to promote connection or isolation, to promote innovation or conservatism. And I think it is better to move, to create, to connect, to innovate. But at the same time, there is the crucial issue of public interest. will it be possible for the public interest to prevail? Or will the laissez-faire politics be the choice? It means that we have a choice to protect or destroy the environment, to preserve or exhaust the resources, to promote solidarity or egoism. And the result of these choices is not absolutely clear for me now. It will be interesting to have your opinion about that. According to these choices, it seems to me that we have 4 basic future scenarios. If we are able to take the measures which are needed for defending public interest in terms of environment protection, of solidarity, then it will be possible to build what I have called here the new civilization we would like to build. But if the complexity increases but we are not able to defend public interest, then if some groups try to use technology only for domination, then we have a risk of running into conflicts, and if we run into conflicts, there is a risk of a collapse, of course, which is important.
Sorry about that.
And now, of course, there is a 4th scenario, which is the scenario where some people would like to avoid the need of complexity. They will say that it is possible to reach public interest goals but avoiding complexity. This has been the position of all the totalitarist system, the integrist system, and in this case also there is a risk of collapse. Well, these are the options, and now I finish with my conclusion. The conclusion is that a global transition must be undertaken if we want to overcome present challenges. This was the main point. This global transition implies a progression towards an increasing complexity, but it needs to be decoupled with the growth of consumption of resources, which need to be preserved. And it will be possible to avoid conflict and collapse only by taking into account environmental preservation and general interest. Well, thank you for your attention. I hope I haven't been too long, but if you have any questions, I shall be pleased to answer.
My comment is this. We have to add a word to this. Decoupling the growth of consumption from the growth of resources. I would say decoupling the growth of non-renewable or non-renewed or non-recycled consumption of resources. Because every type of growth will require additional resources. It could be information as a resource. But if information does anything, unless it's the kind of information that David Bohm talked about, which is, coming from the implicate order to the explicate order, which is very special quantum information. Every other kind of information produces action, and therefore produces entropy. So, if you want a growth of complexity, you need to fuel it, you need to feed it somehow. You need to have some more energy into the system, even if it's informational energy. Which is information content could be major, and the energy content, the entropy content would be very minor, but still something is there. But your point then comes very relevant. You can't recycle energy completely. Second law of thermodynamics in some respects still holds. But you can replace it. You can substitute for it. Because in terms of Prigozhin, we can transfer the production of entropy from the Earth to the Sun. Because it's the sun, basically, that supplies the negative entropy that we are using to produce entropy. So if we are using that kind of input that photosynthesis is using in the biosphere, then we can have increasing growth of resources in order to increase our complexity. But the resource that we use must be replaceable, recyclable, and a flow resource, basically. So I would say that if you add the decoupling from the non-renewable consumption of resources, or from the consumption of non-renewable resources, then you are I'm fully in agreement.
Every person is in their own logic and has very difficulty looking at it from the viewpoint of the other person. Okay. Or another example, which was mentioned by Michel this morning, these two guys saying, I'm sure glad the hole is not in our end. So how many of us have had teams, evening teams? Sometimes you feel, we are not in the same boat.
It's a good picture for humanity.
Yeah, and so humanity on a grand scale is actually, many people feel that they are not in the same boat. So we can live our life happily and let the others find out how hard it is. So, let me just go back to Rudolf Steiner. I read Rudolf Steiner about 25, 30 years ago when I was in a spiritual community in the south of France. And I found that his tripartition of society, distinguishing between the economic sphere, the political sphere, and the cultural spheres, which includes education, arts, the media, family, etc., that he said it's very, very important that these three spheres keep each other in check, that none of them overcomes the others, invades the others. And what has happened, and then I've added, of course, the biosphere on one side and the geosphere on the one side, all the mineral world, if you like, and all the living biological world. And what has happened over the last 150 years, maybe more, is that the economic sphere has invaded all the others. It buys politicians, not just in the States. It buys schools that churn out people for their use, through subsidies or whatever they do, or influential. It buys, it externalizes cost, and therefore can go on and on. So that picture for me says a lot as to what we are to recover from. Because Steiner warned us, he said, if one of the spheres get out of control, then we'll be walking on our heads with all the dangers that comes with that. So that's, for me, one way to say, and now if we, over this, we overlay the integral framework, the 4 quadrants, which is, as all of you, I think, know, distinguishes between the exterior or objective side, that which can be observed from the outside, with more or less objectivity, from the interior or subjective side, both on the individual and a collective level. So we have here observable behavior, all that goes with that. Here we have the interiority, the subjectivity, the personal awareness, views, intentions, attitudes, and deep skills that many people do not see until they are expressed. And then we have the structures and systems, physical, technical, social system, etc. And then the intersubjectivity, which is the cultural views, the habits, the norms, the shared values and vision. And for me, it's very interesting, having been trained in 2 business schools, one in France and one in the States, and then through a very large consulting firm, that the realm of management for a very long time was just confined to these right-hand quadrants. If you modify the structures, the systems, the compensation, people will change. Right? So we can produce the demanded behavior as we did on the assembly line, etc. So for me, the challenge now is actually to not abandon this. This is still very important. We can't live without them, but to rebalance it. And the way I started looking at it is by looking at the 2 paradigms. One is the domination paradigm, which again, Weinheisler speaks very well in her book. I've just put it in 4 quadrants. So what is the domination paradigm? It's the habit that we have internally of comparing ourselves to others. Say, am I better or am I worse than them? And it goes very, very deeply. And Deming, for instance, one of the apostles of the collaborative movement, said the moment that you actually foster that way of thinking by having competition within organizations for results, etc., you actually reinforce the superior-inferior ranking that is in every one of us. Okay. This is the inheritance also from the man, from the prehistoric man, who had to fight tigers and etc. So can I win? So that on the exterior then, for me, is expressed right now by a high degree of fear, particularly of the weak people, and a high degree of violence from the dominating people, and a degree of submission that doesn't enable people to show their singularity, to bring it out. It also justifies authoritarian social structures, hierarchies of domination. That if some people are born or educated to win, to dominate, why not? You know, everyone has their place in the system. And I find, for instance, anyway, I'll stop that. And there are myths and stories idealizing domination and violence and presenting them as normal. I mean, in the States, you know, one of the most deep beliefs is that people can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, whatever their initial conditions. They will make it. I'll show you 15 people who started with nothing. And look at what they have become. Of course, usually they were not born in a black ghetto in one of the worst cities in the States. Usually not. But there may be still some exception. But then the exception becomes the rule. So we justify through stories of success the way the whole wheel works. And that's very pernicious. So what are we trying to replace this with? Well, by a partnership bond. And it's not either or. It's probably a little bit of both ends. Here, when you start from the interior level, is that, yes, I may be different, I may be smaller or taller than you, I may be more or less bright in the way I express myself, but you have equal value to me. And there's a wonderful word, both in English and in French, equivalence, which exactly means that. Equal value. Intrinsically, as human beings, we have equal value. That's very different from the ranking. The mutual trust and low degree of fear and violence, it doesn't disappear completely, but it's lessened at the behavior level. Generally, egalitarian or circular structures. So, in other words, we don't pile up, 10 levels in organizations. You run organizations that are more circular in nature, that go deeply into people being involved in even carving out the vision and strategies of the company. And interestingly, still hierarchies, but not hierarchies of domination, hierarchies of actualization. The wiser, the better. That's what, for me, says hierarchy of actualization. If I am an authentic, reflective human being, then I probably have more of a chance to be promoted in one of these organizations. Because that's really what is valued. And then the myth and stories on our in partnership and presenting it as normal. It was very interesting for me to see that at the UN level, in the conference in Rio, for the first time ever, development could only happen if there was a partnership between private companies, public sector, and civil society sector. They said without that, all development will be just biased one way or the other. That was, for me, at the grand scale, an honoring of the partnership principle. And actually, I spent about 10 years, well, five years and then some more now, doing some, trying to build some partnerships between local companies, ministries, and civil society organizations, both national and international, saying if we can get these people together around the same table and make some decisions on nutrition or whatever, there's a better chance that it will be sustainable. So that's for me partnership at the grand level. So let's move on. So what if human nature was not aggressive, competitive, etc.? And that's what Rifkin, of course, says in his book, on the pathetics. But what if human nature, deep down, is also empathetic, relational, affectionate, cooperative, searching for meaning, looking for both individuation and integration. What if? What if? What does it create? What is the impact on the way we build the systems? Well, to start with, we probably have a different kind of education than the one which pits students against each other for competitive exams, as we have in France in most cases, or to have the best dossier, best file. So developing empathy and emotional maturity, nurturing, collaborative learning, and new education, of course, is beyond school, not just in school. It's in families, and it's all our life. Collaborative learning, shared pedagogical experience. So experience counts more than just stuffing my brain with new concepts. Facilitative teaching, participative inquiry and observation, cultivating biospheric and social literacy. I like this word, literacy. We talk about systemic literacy. Rifkin starts talking about biospheric literacy, which, like biomimicry and others, goes a long way. So, and then I'm going to spare you these two because I just show you when you want to go to the presentation that this is going a little further, like for instance going from the it orientation of the modern age to the I, the we, and the it. And many times when you look at this right-hand column of the emerging paradigms, you usually have an and. We have both agency and communication. We are both objective and subjective. We are engaged, active, and evolutionary. We are self-organizing and self-determined. And for me, that's a big shift in personal development to move from the either or to the both and. You all know that. That, deep down, if we look at the kind of education most of us have received, it was either or. Unless you were in a very, very special kind of educational system. So, and I'll skip you that too. For instance, just to use one, zero-sum or finite game mentality moving to a positive-sum or infinite game mentality. What if life were an infinite game, not a finite game? Changes everything. There was a very little book written about that, finite or infinite games. Absolutely wonderful. So, another one is dualities as opposites and contradictions. No, maybe qualities as paradoxes to be lived with. How do we educate leaders, for instance, I'll come back to that tomorrow, to live with paradox rather than solve it quickly? So, this is another little cartoon. For me, this is the beginning of a new way of looking at being together. We've got these three little mice there confronted with their own labyrinth, and then they have a little huddle. They practice dialogue, and then they come up with a solution, right? Which is both a physical solution and a mental solution. So, I will conclude. I still have 20 minutes, that's good. I won't use them. I'm trying to be on a... And I come back to any of these. Then I took Edgar Morin's book, La Voix, and I said, well, he talks a lot about reforms. Or like inner life. He doesn't use that, he uses spirit, but I put inner life. For me, it's more aesthetics, thought, systemic awareness, empathy, ethics, maybe education. All of this, for me, they fit into the interior quadrant, into the interior individual quadrant. On the other hand, we have medicine, biotech, energy, agriculture, food, politics, work, habitat. They are all more part of the systems and structures. Lower right-hand quadrant, i.e., the exterior collective system. And then you've got these two things. Then the we, composed possibly of education, art and culture, and shared values, and many others. But I've just put the ones that stick out. And then on the exterior, personal side, then you have the life quadrant. How do I consume? We were talking about paper this morning. How do I consume? How do I work? How do I lead my personal life? How do I keep my life in balance between family, work, and personal, and social life? That's basically what I call patterns of behavior. Okay. And then you could see that there are two areas which are a bit both individual and cultural or collective. One is health. My personal health also depends sometimes on the kind of medicine system we have. Okay. You were mentioning that Austria, for instance, has a very favorable health insurance program, and the US don't. Right. And that's probably going to change the way I think about my health and the way I handle my health. And education is here in a sort of at the crossroads between all these sectors. And I want to spend just a little more time on that. So I then took my mouse and started drawing links. And you know, this is going to become a play of spaghetti at the end. But I want to at least recognize that if indeed, and that's what Morin and others say, and definitely Irving, if I change some things in my inner life, in my sense of aesthetics, in my sense of ethics, in my empathy for others, in my thought and systemic awareness, then it's going to influence not just my behavior here, but also it's definitely going to influence my health, the medical system, and the way, for instance, I spend energy, the way where I live, how I work, etc. So you can see that when Gandhi said, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, that's a way to represent it graphically, if you like. And of course it will affect the arts and culture, which reinforce some other things. I try not to show everything in that one, but start with the individual reforms. What if we started not there, only there, but we're also with that? Okay. Second thing is then what is the potential impact of an individual and cultural reforms? So for instance, there is a sense of ethics that can be very individual, but there is a sense of ethics that can also be collective. And that's going to influence the arts and culture, the shared values, the education system, the way we work through politics, the way we work together. And again, it's a very poor, simplified representation. And then you've got the whole spaghettis. What if we change the education system? You know, what would it affect? Certainly the way we think, the way we relate to art, the way we relate to health, the way I could start drawing arrows everywhere. Yeah. The way I want to live, the habitat, the work, etc. So for me, if you include particularly in education, leadership development at all levels, not just for people, big wheels in organizations, all levels. What does it mean to be a leader is one side. Maybe we have a very high leverage point there. And I want to spend more time on that tomorrow. And finally, if we add to that, because we cannot afford to, given the little time we have to only focus on one thing, then if we add some reforms on energy and agriculture, biotech, all the things, particularly that you were mentioning, Alexandre, this morning, then you've got a fairly complicated, some people call it a mess, but it's the level of complexity that you were calling for. You know, how are we able to rise up to the challenge of moving not just 1, 2, 3, 4 sequentially, but simultaneously in these different things? And what can we launch at the local level or regional level, sometimes national level still, or global level in some of these dimensions? What would it mean? So this is just a map, and it's not a user-friendly map. It's kind of complicated, but in a way, life is a plate of spaghetti. You know, it's not cut and dry. So let me add one last thing. Reading Rifkin all the way to the end, I was very interested in seeing that indeed he was paying attention to what is the space within which we can promote some of these things. Not all things, but for instance, talking about energy, which you were talking about this morning. what if indeed by going through the biospheric revolution, renewable energy resources, we said, well, for instance, at the continental level, where all sorts of energies can still be exchanged through a smart grid, could we build towards some, and some smart logistics as well, could we build towards some self-sufficiency? In other words, we don't have to import oil anymore. We can exchange wind energy for solar energy from high wind places to a lot of solar places. I think this is an intriguing idea that, in fact, we may need, in some domains, to move to a continental governance. Of course, he studied Europe, primarily, but he said it would be applicable to Latin America, to a good part of Africa, or maybe two parts of Africa, which are very different kind of things. And that would itself limit the global commerce. See? A lot less things being shipped all over the world just to feed our need for energy and other things. And if you add to that a change in capitalism, which makes it more distributed capitalism, instead of having these $3 trillion circling the world at no cost at all to the owners of these capitals, just looking for the best short-term gains, that would be a different picture. You would still need a collaborative global governance, but it would be limited, and that's what I was drawing this morning. I may take one more thing. And I know I'm putting a lot of things out here. But here's how I heard our conversation this morning. Here's the unit, the I, okay? So the I is in himself, so I could put I, but local we. Okay? And then sometimes there are some reasons to build a national we. At least that's where we come from. Okay, national we. And Rifkin says, what if, especially from the energetic perspective, and what if we had a regional we? Okay. And then there will be some things that still will need a global we. So we actually extend, as Einstein said, if we can increase our circle of compassion to more and more and more people, we'll make that a decision. Okay. So for me, one of the levels of complexity that this creates is actually, how can I, put a big I here, how can I, through education, etc., not just live here in my little cell, my egocentric cell, but have an understanding of the local we, have an understanding of the things that still may be needed at the national we, have an understanding of what needs to be done at the regional level, and finally have an understanding of what to be done at the local level. That, to me, is increasing the level of complexity. And I think this is one of the things we can do here as a group. We were talking about operationalizing things. What if we could translate some of these complicated diagrams and things like this into things where people would say, let's put on my I hat. Let's put on my we local hat. And then for this, let me put on my we national hat, maybe. Although I read 25, 30 years ago, a very wonderful book by Denis de Rougemont. It was called L'Europe des Régions. The Europe of regions. He meant smaller regions at the time, with some ethnic, language, etc. What if I put my regional hat? What if I put my global hat? So for me, this is the education of the future that actually enables people to understand the stakes and what is the right level at which some of these stakes can be handled. So open innovation, for instance, can work at these different levels too. At the local level, at the national level, at the regional level. because it actually asks us to relate to people whom we would normally not relate to because either they are competitors or they are down the line or up the line, etc. So for me, this is portable, and I'll come back to that tomorrow. So I'm going to end with that, and I realize that I may have overdone a little bit the spaghetti thing, but it was for me a sense that let's not be simplistic, because that's the enemy of the good, to be simplistic. But let's try to be operationalizing some of the things that are beginning to emerge, at least for me, from these conversations, that, you know, how do we educate ourselves and educate others in able to encompass this very wide diversity in its own unity. And I think you were pointing to some areas. So some areas are very deeply in here. Okay. Some areas are here. We were talking about the role of arts, for instance, which usually precedes by 50 or 100 years, as Jean Gebser showed very well, actually changes in the social. Some are here, personal life, inner life, and some are here by saying, well, what needs to change here, here, and there in order to promote some changes there? Because changes of behavior are not due to one origin only. They usually arrive through a combination of systemic changes, cultural changes, as well as personal changes. So that's where I am. So I'll leave it at that and see if there are any questions. 7 minutes to go.
So think of any of the practices that we try to undertake in the absence of what you might call new thinking, which is really new consciousness, new awareness, new culture. It won't work. Why? For example, very typically, you try to create sustainable management. Sustainable management in the old thinking means a better way to profit, more sustainable profits, okay? Or a competitive edge, greater market share. So you use everything to, in the context of your main line thinking. Whatever you do, you try to create peace. Maybe you can make more money with it than with war. You know? I mean, it's all advancement in terms of power and wealth. In the context of a mechanistic and basically reductionist, separatist kind of a world, where I am here, you are there. You may be friends, you may be enemies, you may be associates, but you are not me and I'm not you. And Woody Allen once said, you know, jokingly, nature and I, we are two, you know, but that's really what the people nowadays are subconsciously in the old paradigm saying. We are not one, but there's two different things. That's nature and that's me. You know. Not to mention the cosmos. You know, so old paradigm thinking is absolutely necessary. It's absolutely suicidal. No matter what you try to do, if you frame it in the context of this old paradigm, old consciousness, at the most you will prolong the current situation. And that may not be a good thing, actually. Postponing a crisis may be a bad thing, actually, because if the system is intrinsically unsustainable, crisis-prone, then the longer you postpone the crisis, the longer you postpone the change that's necessary to transform the system. Crisis has this marvelous positive side, which the Chinese know very well, about danger is one side, opportunity is the other. Crisis is a key to change, you know, to transformation. So if you try to prolong, to restabilize an old current system, you are creating a more unsustainable situation which will be more difficult to resolve in the long term. It's very interesting if you look at the, because Alan, you also were talking about the political system as one of the main systems. You look at the statements of the political leaders of our world, G20, for example. What are they saying? They are constantly talking about reinstating growth, restabilizing the system. Everything is you know. is the current system that is to be maintained in some way. We are not talking about change, because change is a threat to those who have a very large stake in the current system. Their privileges, their power, their wealth is at stake. So, this kind of thinking, which is aligned with the current system, you can give all the ideas you like in the world. It will just serve to postpone the day of reckoning, make the system live a little longer, make the crisis bigger. We have all the technologies possible. You have seen one of the new reports now for the Club of Rome about the blue planet. Where some have seen 100 ideas, wonderful ideas. But they forget to say, my colleagues, that if you apply these ideas in the framework of your present thinking, of the old paradigm thinking, that's what they always do. There will be a temporary stabilization of the current system, which will then be more difficult to change the process. So we are doing the reverse of what we should be doing. We are stabilizing our own obsolete and dysfunctional system, and we are changing the environment. Should be doing the other way around. We should be stabilizing, making resilient the current dynamics of the environment, because we are built into that environment. For the past 10,000 years, since the last ice age, humanity has been dependent on the equilibrium, on the dynamic processes of the environment, as it has been fairly stable for 10,000 years, with variations, obviously, peaks and lows, but fairly stable on the whole. Our agriculture system, our habitation systems, our energy systems, everything is based on that. Now we are changing that, maintaining ourselves, but changing that system is precisely going the wrong way around, because then the system will not disappear, it will settle into a new equilibrium. And this new equilibrium could be quite favorable for some other species, but it's very unlikely to be favorable to the human species, because we are built into this particular equilibrium and we are operating at the outer limits of what this equilibrium can provide for us to live on. 7 billion people is probably as close as to this exploiting the resources, the dynamics of this system as you can get, going already on the danger point, already on the point where you ask yourself, will it be possible to maintain 7 billion people alive on this system, given this system? So, okay, make a long story short. First point is, no matter what you do, if you do it with the old mentality, you won't do any good with it. Business as usual, whether you try to re-stabilize it or just do the same thing, you're not changing. What you need to do is change. So transformation, either sooner or later, there is a marvelous new knowledge, new ideas are coming to light about the need for transformation, about the need for this shift, and also the need for spirituality. I have taken the initiative about a year and a half ago when I was out in California at the Sages and Scientists Conference of Deepak Chopra, talking about the role of spirituality. So at then, I started an internet forum, which is called the Science and Spirituality Forum, which always has four people per round, 2 spiritual people, 2 scientists. The last one is the main topic of the last one was the role of spirituality in crisis. I advise you to look at it. You can see the Science and Spirituality Forum, or look up my website, which has my name, .com, and they are also republished at Huffington Post, by the way, so they reach a lot of people. It's all just different aspects of the fact that we're coming to realize that there's a fundamental shift is needed, and this fundamental shift will not occur or will not occur in time until and unless there is a fundamental shift in a way of thinking. And that's not purely a rational matter. It's also emotional matter and instinctive matter. It's a value matter also. Therefore, it means a change in awareness of consciousness, whichever you want to use. Whichever you want to use. So that's the first point. I don't want to belabor it anymore. Second point is, if you want to shift, if you want to ask yourself what you can do positive in this situation where, where you need to do something else, what guidelines can you get? Obviously, there are a lot of things that you can do, and on every field, whether you do the paper industry or whether you do detergents or whatever you do in the world, you know, there are so many ways that you can have alternatives in front of you that you can act. What guidelines can you? I suggest those things that you already had in presentation, particularly by also Alexander. Yes. This presentation, to me, it becomes very clear. I put it in this context. We live on a planet. Okay? This planet moves in the solar system. Looking at it as a system, it has two particular characteristics. It's open to energy. It's closed to matter. Open to energy, energy flow from the sun that streams to us at an enormous measure, enormous quantities. Okay. And it's then radiated off from the surface of the seas, from the deserts, from the mountaintops, or before it's radiated off, it can be made to do work because it has a high negative entropy content and it's free energy. Whether you make it do work or not makes no difference to the thermodynamics of the system. Whether before you read it, it's like you have a mill. You have a mill, water is coming up on top, you know, water mill, you know. It goes out on the bottom. Whether you use to drive it a mill or not, it's the same water comes on top, same water goes out on the bottom. But in between, you can derive work from usable energy. If you derive usable energy from the energy that's reaching us already, it don't change the equilibrium. If we add energy to this, whether it's fossil energy, whether it's so-called green energy, sustainable nuclear energy, because this is almost infinite, so okay, but it's not infinitely maintainable in terms of its equilibrium, because you're adding energy. Sooner or later, you're changing the thermal balances. As I said, the change of thermal balance might be very fine for the next dominant species, maybe octopus on the sea, maybe who knows, but it's not likely to be favorable to the human species. So use the energy that's coming to you to the maximum possible, to as much as possible. You have got to reduce the input of artificial energies, of additional energies that are already not in the biosphere. Now the fossil is not artificial, but the fossil is solar radiation that hit the Earth thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, or billions of years ago, and it's there. But now we are releasing it, and for our current biosphere, it's an additional energy. Nuclear energy is not artificial energy, but because it's there in the sun, but it's not in the biosphere. If you put it in here, it's an additional element. So all of these are ways in which you are altering the system, which you should be really trying to preserve, because it's our lifeline. It's the ticket whereby 7 billion people can survive on the planet. That's one of the things. The other aspect is matter. Now, you know, as a scientist, I say there is no such thing as matter. It's an illusion for sensory organs, because they are packets of energy, basically, ultimately. But for practical purposes, this is material. You know. Everything that is more dense than my own sense of touch, and everything that reflects light and produces sound is, for practical purposes, is matter. Okay. Now, this kind of matter is on board in the spaceship. Nothing comes into it, nothing goes out of it. I'm discounting a couple of meteorites, and they hope that they won't be too big, you know, that they're really making problems. And I'm discounting a couple of spaceship sondage that goes to Mars and that gets lost in space. Basically, nothing in, nothing out. Energy in, energy being processed, energy out. Matter in, matter stays in. Okay? The matter is being processed. If you process it in a way, I mean matter, the kind of matter that's a resource, that's a material resource for life, that can be chemical, physical, biological. If you process it in such a way that after use you cannot use it again, then you're producing irreversible waste. If you're living on a spaceship, as you happen to be, you are creating garbage that accumulates. So instead of onboard resources that we can use to nourish ourselves for life and our industries and everything that we want to do, we are creating waste. We are creating garbage. So if you keep doing that, sooner or later you reach the point where the resources will be more and more scarce, garbage will accumulate, will interfere with the natural processes, and basically the viability of this system is going to be degraded. And very obviously, therefore, we have got to make use of the energy that comes to us, the flow energy. We have got to use it in such a way that we cycle and recycle, reuse, or substitute for non-renewable material resources. So that we continually have available, usable material resources. Basic sense, but all you have to think of yourself being on a spaceship. If you think of yourself this way, then you see, what we're doing is we are having some batteries on board, which is the fossil energies, for example. We're using them, and sooner or later, it's our energy capital, we're using it up. We have some resources that we brought on board on this spaceship. We are using them, and we are throwing the garbage back. We have less and less resources and more and more garbage. So if you think of it this term, it makes very much sense. So I would say, as a key marker to use a current popular term in your thinking, ask yourself, whatever you are doing, whatever you propose to do, whatever you propose to change, is it sustainable in that sense? Does it make use to the optimum available, because you can't change the system, optimum available level of the flow energies that we have available? Does it optimally use the material resource that you have and make it available for further use? You ask yourself these things, then you'll find what to do, whether you happen to be in the paper industry or in the airline industry or in communications or whatever else you do. So I think that the creativity is already motivating. All you have to do is give it the guidelines. What is feasible? What is sustainable? Our basic issue is that the way we are operating this spaceship, we have been operating this spaceship for the past 8,000 or 10,000 years, since the Neolithic Revolution, since the last ice age, is not sustainable, has not been sustainable all along. But before, it only destroyed the local environment, deforested, for example, overused resources, polluted local rivers, etc. But our numbers were too small, our technologies were not powerful enough, so we didn't notice it. In fact, it looked like the Earth was practically an infinite system. It's an infinite source of resources, an infinite sink of wastes. Who would have thought, even 100 years ago, that this is not the case? Who would have thought that by throwing some bottles into the sea, we are going to overload it with plastic? I mean, plastic. But who would have thought that we can pollute the seas? Who would have thought in Egypt or Babylonia or in China 5,000 years ago that if you throw your garbage into the Yellow River, that's going to create a problem in the Pacific Ocean or Nile and the Mediterranean? It's absolutely inconceivable. So we can't blame our forefathers, basically. They thought we were living practically in an infinite world for our practical purposes. First of all, he thought it was flat, but even if it's round, which is difficult to imagine, but nowadays we seem to go around the Earth quite fast, so we have good reasons to believe that it is round. But even then, it's difficult to imagine that we actually, what we do, changes the balance, changes the dynamics of the whole system. when you take it from systems theory, take it to chaos theory, then you know when you reach close to the level of dynamic equilibrium in a system, then changes can propagate very fast. Very small changes can have big effects, so-called butterfly effects. And then you know, small things that you do, which seem to be minor, could have tremendously important global effects. So everything we do, everything each of us does, has this possibility of either contributing or to damaging the world in which we live. Either contributing to creating a sustainable world by changing it, or damaging the current world. Paradoxically, in some ways, to hasten the crisis is not a bad thing, except that if you're not prepared, then God knows how it will hit us. When there's a major ecological crisis, or a social, or a demographic crisis, health crisis, created by these equilibria that we have. So it would be nice to be able to get to a point where you have a manageable crisis. How do you do that? See? But then we have to be able to be sufficiently prepared so we can manage the crisis. Otherwise, we better start preparing and then we just treading water. We're just hoping to avoid. We can't avert the crisis. We can't avoid it. We can put it off. And that is what the leadership today seems to be wanting to do. Just put it off, either by ignoring it or telling everybody, never mind, because after all, this is the way things are, this is human nature, this is the economics, this is political science, this is what it is, this is what the system is. So don't even try to do anything about it. Okay, except reinforce it. Okay, that's second point. The third point, and then I'll be basically done. I just want to give these sort of markers. I think one of the greatest difficulties we have had in the past 50 years or so, or 70 years since the Second World War, we have created a world that is highly centralized, where power is central, technology is central, and we operate locally by depending on globally controlled central powers. We have seen that highlighted in the Fukushima problems in Japan, where you have some basic, big power reactors. All of the country, all of life in Japan, respectively, was dependent on the operation of these reactors. And now the Japanese have been asking themselves, I hope they still keep asking themselves, do we really need that level of dependence on a centralized technology or a centralized power source? So that everything that we do is so much at risk if something goes wrong there. Nature doesn't operate like this. And this is, I think, something that we can learn. Talk about biomimicry, we talk about altogether learning from nature. Nature uses the resources that are available wherever they are. And when you talk about reliance, I think it should be a good idea to think of reliance on the local environment. This is quite different from globalization. Globalization, where you have the overall giant picture and you try to steer the global system. I think we have to look at the global system, and our last person in the world who would contest the need to have a global vision. Okay? But when we are actually putting our life at stake, then let's try to use the resources that we have available on an ongoing basis wherever we live. And that means energy resources, that means material resources. Perhaps information is not really dependent too much on that, except for culture. Culture resources, yes, because culture and traditions give you stability, give you a grounding in something, in a meaningful world. So you can't overthrow simply your local cultures. But otherwise, information is truly global. But use that information to realize that our resources for our life are highly varied the world over. And the resources we have around us need to be optimally used and not put into the hands of global interests that are basically only have their own selfish interests in mind. Even if they talk about sustainability, they'll still talk about sustainability in terms of maintaining their own power, maintaining their own wealth, maintaining their own interests. So decentralizing the tremendously conglomerated, tremendously centralized way in which we become dependent on forces that are outside of the local control. Self-reliance. Life works like this, and ecology provides the resources for the populations that are members of that ecosystem. Some of the resources, like the quality of the air and the climate and so on, obviously are global, but we are dependent on how it works out locally. So it seems to be an opposition. It seems to be, on the one hand, we are moving to a globalization. On the other hand, we say we have got to decentralize. Not really an opposition, I don't think. There's a nice principle coming also from systems thinking, which says when you develop a system growing to a complexity, you'd have integration on the top and differentiation on the bottom, very typically. What that means is, as the system grows, becomes more complex, it tends to integrate with other systems in its environment. To some extent, try to have exchanges, more and more exchanges. And as these exchanges solidify, function is the father of structure. As the exchanges solidify, you have structures created, like the European coal and steel community of exchanging coal and steel. Then you have created a community. Then you have more and more interdependence on various areas, financial areas. Then you have the whole European community, and now you have European Union. Culture, systems grow together, function, create the structure. So if we can do that, integrating on top, it doesn't mean that we can't differentiate on bottom. We can have, for example, in Europe, we have a European integration with differentiation between Oberösterreich and Tyrol. And what is the local area here? Is it Oberösterreich? No.
Yes.
Is it Oberösterreich?
Yeah.
Okay. And the various parts of it. So it's not a contradiction. Somebody you mentioned Denis de Rougemont, is the Europe of the regions, for example. We could have regional cultures, relative regional autonomy. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be a European Union. The same way in the world, we could have these nearly 200 nation states, each giving culture, each giving identity. Not all of them are capable of it, but most of them can, to their people, and working together. And yet, each one of them can have its own individuality and can have its own specificity. Unity in diversity. So, not a contradiction. You always want to grow together. Yes, go together. Then your identity will disappear. It doesn't have to. In a natural system, an ecosystem, each element of the ecosystem maintains its identity. But there can be continental ecosystems where all elements work together to some extent. Or look at your own body. How many cells are involved in it? How many organs? They are differentiated. The more complex an organism, the more differentiated its organs, its organ systems, and the cellular systems. Yet they can all work together for the common purpose of maintaining the system. These are the natural ways of thinking. So, of acting. The new thinking. The new thinking is old thinking. The new thinking is really acting like a species on a planet, a global species. We become a global species. We can't afford to make this kind of mistakes because our mistakes do not just destroy the local environment, now they destroy the global environment. So, these are the major points. Practice, yes, we can have many things. I've written myself books on chapters and chapters about, in political practice, in social practice, but not alone. I'm just reading a book now that's been published a few weeks ago called The Protein Crunch. Oh, yes. Marvelous, because it gives you all the statistics why it's absolutely impossible these current practices to maintain the food for 7 billion people. So in all these respects, we need to change. It won't change unless we change our mentality, unless there's a culture change. We recognize that we are global species on a planet, and we've got to start acting as such. If this we could get in our mind, I think the creativity inherent in people, in every profession, in every culture, in every segment of society, there is creativity. And there is, don't forget, this tremendous, call it a survival instinct, a tremendous pull or push to maintain ourselves. When we are threatened, there is something coming to the fore. Other species too, but other species, the lemmings commit collective suicide. Bacteria become sterile, etc. When they overfill the dish, which they get the food supply, etc. All species, when they are at the point of extinction or the point of danger of extinction, something happens collectively. Now, we happen to have a consciousness of this level. I think they all have consciousness, but we have to have a consciousness which is self-aware, where we can be aware of ourselves, of our own consciousness. And we can recognize that there is something happening which on the one hand is threatening our survival, on the other hand is already provoking changes in our thinking. Therefore, what do we need to do? We need to promote the changes. We need to sustain those changes, those positive changes. Is it the culture of creatives, you call it, or the alternative cultures, the green cultures, the solidarity cultures, the empathies, or whatever. We have a limited time available before the crisis comes that we cannot handle. So let's promote those things. The changes are occurring. The process that my colleagues and I call world shift has already started. And the response to it has also started. A new way of thinking is emerging. There's emergence. It's also a nice thing Barbara Max Hubbard and others say, from emergency comes emergence. I don't think it works in other languages, but at least in English. So this is a process. We are in the midst of a process. If we are conscious human beings and moral human beings, members of this community, then we try to do our best to further the processes of change so that the new world that's bound to come in the next years, next 10 years, God knows when, but it's not in very long, then we will be able to be equipped for it, and we will be able to maintain as much of this tremendous human population alive and well as possible. Because that's not at all ensured for the time.
Thank you very much.
4 different ways to use the future. When you speak, I have been traveling in different countries, and always I ask people about their future and trying to understand how they imagine the future. And you have, exactly as Jennifer said, you have typically 4 different ways to think about the future. You have an archaic way, which is eternal return and endless cycle. Actually, people who are in gathering era are all the culture who are mythic. They are living on this all over the planet. After, during the religions, agriculture era, you have people who was living on a traditional way, under the power of God, and you have still the eternal return, but only with a kind of dimension where you can speak with the God. So you can begin to change a little, or hope to change a little. Actually, one of the main religions in this thing, to have vectorialized the time. Christian religion was the first religion to begin to give a direction. They are God, and then you have the first human, and then the father of my father, and then you have a vector in the time. And then you begin to have people who are visionary of the future and introduce change. Actually, it was the first religion ever who has this completely crazy idea that human can change and that the world could evolve. But they were thinking on a very large scale of time. And all religion is living on a very traditional vision of the world. And that brings a nostalgia of the past. And you have still a lot of people who say, okay, no problem, just return to the old time. You know, you have a lot of people who say this. Okay, the future is hopeless. Then let's return to the past. But as they have been said very well, it is impossible for different reasons that we will not speak. And then you have the modern way. Business as usual and technofix. Let's continue the business as usual. We will sound science have find solution in the past. Why not in the future? I have a lot of very intelligent people. I think most of the powerful people actually think on this way. And then you have a very little group of persons who understand that we need a rupture and societal transformation.
So rupture is a French word, and the best translation is either breakthrough and or breakdown. So it's really...
Disruption is not...
Yeah, disruption could be one.
Approach. So there are already two solutions. Where breakdown, collapse, disappearation of humanity, or evolution. And there are already four typical illusions of vanity. Just wait the end of the cycle, fatalism. Return to old tradition solution, fundamentalist. Hope that science will solve the problem, scientists. That are the four typical, the three, four typical. And there are other one. Because when you those three one are the most general, you see it everywhere. But there are one who appears to be intelligent, pragmatic, which is the people who prepare ourselves or our community to a chaotic transition. A pragmatic solution, but not really efficient because of the hysteresis of our global planetary ecological, sociological, and economic system. I mean, you have a lot of people in America, even in Europe, who should say, okay, let's make a community, let's produce our energy, you know, this kind of thinking. And in front of the chaos of the world, we will be more able to survive. That would have been absolutely true at the end of the Roman Empire. And it has actually the monastery was a very good answer. But this pragmatic solution will not work because just the world globally will be too warm and this little community will disappear also. Perhaps they survive a little longer than most of the people, but they disappear also. So why we need a vision? Business as usual bring Earth in hell. Our actual action will have a damned effect on the long term that future generations will not be able to reverse, even if they wish to do. That is a very important thing. It is that we are empoisoning on a non-reverse possibility the future of our children. Even if I arrive to have a big amount of money, what is the meaning to be rich in a world where my children will not survive? How we can develop a new vision? I think, and I am very happy that we have to enhance democratic process, because it is clear that each time during the evolution, we have an evolution, it was through a more deep democratic process. And as I am completely agree with Alain Gauthier that the actual democracy is more a plutocracy. So we have to profoundly develop the democratic process. Develop integral education. It is clear that as in the industrial era. Why we was able to develop the industrial era? Because we spread all over the world school to develop a new education, not a feudal education, but a new education to bring science and develop the values of equality, of modern science and everything. So education, it is why the project of Erwin of a new school on internet seems for me so central. It is a good way to have a leverage, a very deep leverage, very quickly. Spread integral open innovation ecosystem of research and action. I think we are doing right now a kind of matrix, but we should learn other people to do the same things at Earth and really spread this kind of meeting all over the world. It is very important. Multiply opportunity of dialogue between culture and discipline. And it is why I'm so happy so you are there, because it appears that the new civilization will be a blend of all the culture and the diversity of the planet. Develop understanding of the past and will to imagine new future. And the two are not contradiction, because you need to have a deep understanding of the past to be able to imagine your future. For example, for me, it was very important to go deep in the history of mankind to understand how the future can transform. Why my next book will be in English? I am a French. My next book will be in English because most of my sources of information are in English. The English language is a planetary language of research. It is a good platform language and the most easy to be translated in other tongues. I need to develop my international impact and, by the way, my ability in English. So I decided that is a big news to write my next book. After 10 books in French, I will make my next books in English, which is a challenge for me because, as you see, I don't speak so well English. I'm very interested to have your reaction and you can participate. So I was thinking to begin by the making of the book, because even in this book, in this kind of book, to speak about the epistemological context of the book is very important. So the making of the book is the beginning of the book. Epistemic assumption clarifies the epistemic assumption I have writing this book. The future in question, it is a kind of clin d'œil. Your book. Understand the past to anticipate the future. Lithosphere, biosphere, and noosphere. Main step in the evolution of mankind. The transformation of human organization. How culture and art evolve. The value of values. Horizon of the future. The planetary crisis. A SWOT systemic integral analysis of the planetary crisis. Civilization of the future and future of the civilization. A puzzle of solution, the three pillars of human sustainable development, economy, sociology, ecology, and I will explain how economy have to change, how sociology have to change, and how ecology have to change deeply. The new identity of the self, I think that each time the civilization changed, even the self changed deeply. For example, the self in a feudal world is not at all the same that in a modern world. So it is very important, as Olivier said, it is different, it takes a long time to change of culture, but it takes 5 minutes to change of posture. And actually you touch this idea, it is that it takes time to change of culture, but you can change your identity in 5 minutes. If you just have this in the head, you have not the same software. You change of software, and then you change of culture. Why we need a new philosophy? The integral philosophy, conclusion, bibliography. So I finish by the philosophical issue. Okay, so thank you. I am happy to answer your question, and also, as it is the beginning of the week, I will be very happy to share with you, and if you can help me in the writing of these books, that will be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Why we choose Lackirchen is to have this fantastic privilege to field awareness.
Olivier, I just had a fantastic insight.